So classy. If you are familiar with my work at all, you will remember that this is a thing I've been trying to do, this monologue project. It's taken me a month to do the first one, so welcome to it. So these are the guidelines I gave myself. They're pretty self-explanatory. I basically just wanted to keep it to what's been going on with this piece, this is what's happening as I'm working on it, and this is how it turned out. So I am doing a monologue by Emilia from Othello, and it's actually a very famous monologue. It's the piece that she does when she is with Desdemona, and it's right before the very end of the play when all hell breaks loose. So I began working on this piece the way that you should always begin when you're working on Shakespeare, which is going directly to the language itself. I started by scanning this monologue so that I could see what's happening with the rhythms of each line and what that tells me as an actor with regard to Emilia's emotional state, what kind of thoughts she's having as she's saying these words. This is a piece I actually worked on in grad school for a little while, but I wasn't really in love with it. Emilia never stood out to me as a Shakespearean woman that I felt drawn to in terms of putting her in my character repertoire. But as I started looking at the language of this piece and really writing through it and thinking through it, she started to get more real, and that started to get exciting. I did 2 more analyses of the text, one looking at just the thought breakdown, where each line actually ended, and then looking at the figurative language, the poetry of the words themselves. Something I could not ignore in looking at this monologue was acknowledging the fact that Emilia is married to Iago, who is held as the ultimate villain in Othello, and Iago is essentially the one who is responsible for definitely Emilia's death, but also Desdemona's because of what he puts Othello through, although Othello's the one who actually kills Desdemona. And I started thinking, as a modern woman who lives in the 21st century, is Iago this abusive husband to Emilia in their marriage before all of this happens with Othello and Desdemona? Is he this abuser who plays these psychological mind games because he gets off on it? And essentially, does he turn Othello into himself, convincing Othello to commit the murder that Iago himself may not have been willing or ready to do, until, of course, he is actually willing to do it? Emilia is the one woman in the play who actually stands up for what is right. She speaks her mind, and because she defies her husband, that is when he kills her, to silence her, to shut her up. And that is an incredibly powerful image, because as anyone who's familiar with domestic violence knows, that's how you control somebody. You know, you literally hold that person's life in your hands in the relationship. So this was something I could not ignore when thinking about who Emilia is, and it spurred the rest of my research into her character. I started getting really interested in kind of the history of the character of Emilia, so I did some research, and it's no surprise that I was able to find a bunch of articles talking about how she is hailed as one of the great feminist Shakespearean characters. I really like this article because it specifically talks about Emilia as this ultimate warrior woman. She is facing death and will not be silent. That is the ultimate "I am woman, hear me roar" battle cry. Even though Othello overall is a tragedy, I did not want this monologue to be all gloom and doom. I didn't want it to overshadow or force the idea that everything is terrible, everything is tragic all the time, because when this scene is happening, Emilia is just with her friend. She's with Desdemona. They're having a conversation. There should be humor. There should be lightness. Emilia is the antithesis to Iago, who is all about the manipulation, who's all about power and control. This is ultimately what makes the marriage between Emilia and Iago so fascinating, because we don't really get an opportunity to see what their life together is like. And yet something had to draw them together, and perhaps it's that they're both great speakers and they both desire to be heard. But in this moment, she's not thinking about all the death and the horrors that are about to happen. She's not aware of that yet. So she's just commenting on life, sharing a moment with her friend. And that's the real poetic irony here. That sense of little did they know, ... Something else I was writing about on this page is the fact that I've been struggling with my voice, my physical voice, recently. I've been undergoing a lot of stress the last, really long time, but the last 6 months it's been very concentrated, and I've noticed that it's affected my physical speech. I do not sound as self-assured or as strong as I used to, or as Emma, want to, and so that's something else that I've been working on throughout this process, are reclaiming the vocal warm-ups that I used to do, and letting the language of this monologue, which is so powerful and does have so much passion and heart to it, letting that help infuse my physical speech as well. I still have a long way to go in that category, but this has been a really great project, and I'm actually really proud of how it's kind of turned out. I've been able to fall in love with a Shakespearean character that I didn't feel connected to before. Shakespeare has a lot of women roles that I have played and that I still want to play that are really wonderful, and honestly a lot of the men as well. But Emilia was never on that list for me, and now she feels like a go-to character. She feels like a kindred spirit, and that feels really amazing. I will visit this monologue again and again, so this is not a definitive performance, but for the moment, this is Emilia.
But I do think it is their husbands' faults, if wives do fall. Say that they slack their duties, and pour our treasures into foreign laps, or else break out in peevish jealousies, throwing restraint upon us. Or say they strike us, or scant our former having in despite. Why, we have galls, and though we have some grace, yet have we some revenge. Let husbands know their wives have sense like them. They see and smell and have their palates both for sweet and sour, as husbands have. What is it that they do when they change us for others? Is it sport? I think it is. And doth affection breed it? I think it doth. Is't frailty that thus errs? It is so too. And have not we affections, desires for sport and frailty, as men have? Oh, then let them use us well. Else let them know the ills we do, their ills instruct us so.